class on the medicinal benefits of natural clay. I'm Neal Bosshardt from Redmond, Utah. Come on in. No. And there's
a handout.
Yeah.
Grab it.
Yeah. There's.
Oh.
Yeah. And I wish I had time to talk about my passion. My passion is helping people in third world countries get clean water. How many steps did it take you today to get to a source of clean water? There's people who walked miles to get clean water. And a guy in Salt Lake invented a human-powered drill that can create deep wells in third world countries where drill trucks can't reach. It's an amazing organization. It's my favorite, one of my favorite charities, and my card is here. If you're interested in more information, contact me. I'd love to do a class on that. I do need to say that I did not come up with natural clay uses on its own. Back in the 1970s, the health food people introduced us to a book called Our Earth is Our Cure, written by a French homeopath, where he says that the right kind of clay has medicinal properties. Now I say right kind of clay because there's as many kinds of clays as there are breeds of dogs. And just like, if you want to go hunting, you probably don't want a Chihuahua as your hunting dog. But on the other hand, if you want a lap dog, you probably don't want a St. Bernard. So there's a difference. So some clays work, some clays don't. This class I normally teach an hour and a half. So I'm not going to go into all of the details that I would like to, but Shireen sells a book. So you can find this book on the internet at times. I've seen it for $150. I wouldn't buy it. Shireen's, I sell these, this is my book. I sell these for $5. Shireen sells them for $2. And in this book, there's a QR code that takes you to my class. It's a YouTube class. It's this class. That class has details that I won't have time to share here today. There's other...
What's the name of the book? We
Eat Clay and Wear It Too.
Okay.
Not very creative, am I?
Like it.
So we're going to talk about the clay, and again, I don't have time to go into the history that I'd love to, but I want to show you what clay does. And as I show you what clay does, both internally and externally, has anybody been in my class before? Wow. I figured I'd have some repeat. Usually half the people in my class are repeat people. Sometimes I say, well, why aren't you up here teaching? And they say, well, I learn more every time. That is a 3-inch diameter hole on the top of a guy's head. He had a cancerous tumor removed from the top of his head. And they told him they couldn't do a skin graft. And so they said to heal, and of course they can't sew it shut. So they said keep it moist. It has to stay moist and let it heal by itself. To keep it moist, you use this product called hydrogel. You get it through the doctor at the drugstore. Putting that hydrogel on that felt like pouring alcohol in that open wound. He only did it once. And he'd come to a class in this very room last March that I taught for Shireen. And in that class, I told him how a doctor told me that there's 2 keys to healing a wound. One is prevent infection. The other is keep it moist. So he thought, well, if I'm supposed to keep this moist, clay keeps it moist. He said putting a patty of clay, and we'll show you the clay they used. He said it felt like putting a cold, wet washcloth on his head. And then he put a thick gauze pad on the top of it so it couldn't dry out. He would change it twice a day. When he would put it on his head, it would be about like mustard or mayonnaise. When he would take it off, several hours later, it would be about like Play-Doh. Still moist, but much drier. So that is his head in, let's see. Okay, yeah, so that's the original. Then within, I think this was like 3 days, that's 3 months. Nothing but clay. Now, there's some of the...
I hope I don't need that.
Yeah, there's some other pictures here. Is anybody squeamish? Does everybody love really bad pictures? If you don't like bad pictures, cover your eyes, because I like to show people what it does. Again, that's just... And these aren't in order. The guy who helped me set this up today, he put them in here so I can use them, but they're not in order. So apologize that it's not totally in order. Anybody have enough medical background to recognize that? Any nurses, doctors, EMTs? What is it? Somebody's got to know.
X-ray of a leg.
Yes, X-ray of a leg. That's a calf. That's the knee joint up there. That's her ankles down here. That's a lady's leg. What's in the leg is a tiller tine. This lady was tilling her garden with a long skirt. The skirt got caught in the tines, and it pulled her leg into the tine. The tine went in and then also poked out. They unbolted the tine and took her to the hospital with the tine in her leg so the hospital could remove it. That's just another shot. But this is day 1 and day 7. Not day 1 of the injury, but day 1 of clay. At the hospital, they took the tine out. You can imagine how much dirt was on that tine that was dragged through her leg as it went in and out. So they cleaned it up, and the guy had used clay on external wounds, sprains and things by the husband. So he called me saying, "Can you use clay on an open wound?" I said, "Yes, you can." Well, of course, they wouldn't let him use clay in the hospital, but as soon as they got home after 3 days in the hospital, they packed it in clay. So that's day 1 of clay, day 7 of clay. Now it's been another week. He's Amish, and so, they don't have cameras that take pictures very often. So a lady who comes to their house does have a camera to help him dress the wounds. And I talked to him today. He was supposed to send me an updated picture last night, and it didn't come. And I talked to him today, and he said, "Yeah, sorry, we forgot. But we'll take one tonight." But he says, it is looking really, really good. He said, it is just amazing. Pain, he said, once we got home from the hospital and started packing it in clay, her pain level was minimal. It just looked so good. Anyway, that's the hole where the tine went in. And then this is the hole that's smaller because this is where the tine poked out. So there was a tunnel through her leg where it went in and then it came out. At the hospital, they were taking gauze and soaking gauze in a saline solution, using a 9-inch dowel to push the gauze through the hole. And I don't know if they pushed it in and then pulled it out, or if they just pushed it in from both sides. Painful. He said once we got home, we soaked the gauze in clay, in a thin solution of clay. He said pushing that gauze-soaked clay through that hole, he said the pain was so much less than the saline solution. And he says every time we take that gauze out, the clay comes out with the gauze, garbage comes out. It was, for the first 2 days that they used clay, it was stinky, really stinky, because all the infection that had been growing in the hospital. But he said after the second day of clay, no smell. No smell. Let's go to, okay. This is my neighbor's arm the day after he put an acetylene torch across it. That's an acetylene torch, 3rd-degree burn, didn't leave work because a 3rd-degree burn doesn't hurt that bad. A 3rd-degree burn doesn't hurt as bad as the 1st or 2nd. So he never even left work when it happened. But the next day at work, those nerve endings started to heal, and he called his wife and said, "Have some clay waiting for me, but if it doesn't help, we're going to the hospital." He said, "I didn't know it could hurt this bad." So I met him at his house that night. His wife told me what happened. I met him at his house that night. We put a thick layer of clay on there, just like I'll show you here in the class today. Within 10 minutes, it doesn't hurt anymore. He changed it Wednesday. He changed it Thursday. Friday morning, he never put any more on because it was just pink skin. This is a boy who fell next to a running treadmill. And so the treadmill was just chewing away his leg. They got it turned off. They packed it in clay. His pain level dropped like a rock. The only discomfort they had was when they would change it. But within a week, totally new skin, healed just fine. This is a spider bite, a brown recluse spider, and I'll only show one thing. Well, this was the toe that was bitten. That is the point, a pencil or a pen mark where the doctor had put where the infection had gone to up at that point. But it didn't quit there. It went to the adjoining toes. This is 11 days after the bite. You can see the adjoining toes now are infected. At this point, she's on full bed rest, feet elevated, trying to drive the poison into the rest of her body to dissipate it in hopes of saving the toe. And I just thought, why not remove the poison? They don't know. It's okay. Let's see, 1 day after the clay, 3 days after the clay, and just new skin. So 13 days of clay, 4 months later. This is a Lance Armstrong wannabe. He wrecked on a bike going 25 miles an hour down the highway, slid off the asphalt into the bar pit, filled his leg, removed a lot of skin, and then filled the leg with gravel, debris. The race doctor told him, if you don't go to the hospital and have this taken care of in the hospital, you'll be scarred for life. He went home, packed his leg from hip to ankle in clay, lay down on the couch and fell asleep. Everybody who uses this calls it an external painkiller. And 2 hours later, he showered. He woke up 2 hours later, got in the shower, showered the clay off, and all of the rocks and the dirt and the gravel and the debris that would have been scraped out in the hospital came out with the clay. Guess which didn't hurt as much? This is a lady here in Utah Valley. She broke her ankle. They had to pin it. The pins got infected. She was in and out of the wound clinic twice a week for 4 months. Twice a week, 4 months. And all during those 4 months, her sister-in-law was begging her to pack it in clay. This lady said, no way on earth is mud going to touch this wound, because she had never had any experience with it. The sister-in-law had some amazing healing stories. But after 4 months, they began to talk to this lady about life as an amputee, preparing her mentally to become an amputee because the infection had gone into the bone, and to save her life, they were talking of removing her foot. At that point, she called her sister-in-law and said, I'm more open-minded today. I'd like to hear about that mud again. Packed it in clay, and in a week, you can see the change in a week, 3 weeks. Her last email to me said, thanks to the clay, I still have a foot. This was a cancer wound that healed. An 8-year-old boy ran over his hand with a little go-kart. His dad's an EMT. He knew that to take him to the hospital, they can't sew that. They'll just cut off that skin and let it heal. So he did it at home. And 2 days later, looked like that.
So is that day one picture clay poultice?
No, day one, there's nothing on it. That was...
No, I mean day one and then day
Oh, yes, day one, that's clay on there.
That's
yeah,
clay.
that's clay. And I'll show you how to do it. Now this is the bad one. This is an Amish farmer who caught his thigh in a piece of equipment, between two pieces of equipment, and it ripped his leg open. It's like you walked up and went like that. So no flesh was taken away, it was just relocated from up here down there. He called me, he said he had a 4-inch cut on his leg. He didn't say that it was 2 inches deep and 3 inches wide. He had clay, he had that wound packed in clay before he ever called me. He had it within 10 minutes of the accident. He had that hole filled with clay and the area of clay, and then he had it wrapped with vet wrap, which is like an ace bandage. And then he called to ask, well, his wife called and asked, will clay heal a cut? So a week later, it looked like that. A week later, it looked like that. Day 24, that's 3 weeks. a month. Day 45, 2 months.
Wow.
So day 3 and day 78. Somebody asked him, how many pain pills did you take? He said, how many do you think I took? And they said, well, from the looks of the wound, probably a bottle a day. Not one. Never took even a Tylenol. So, let's
see how you do that.
okay. I'm looking for volunteers.
Do you keep reapplying clay?
That's what you're going to see here in just a minute, as soon as I figure out how to turn this off. Yeah. So we're going to show you now how to use the clay externally. You want the clay to be about like mayonnaise or mustard. The clay comes as a fine dry powder. Looks like baby powder, and we'll talk about baby powder. But mayonnaise or mustard, you want it to be thick enough to where when you put it on a wound, it doesn't drip, but you want it to be thin enough to where when you put it on a wound, it smooths easily. The last thing you want is a grandchild in pain, and here grandma is shoving on his owie because the clay is so stiff, they're trying to spread it around. So mayonnaise or mustard is what you want. In our kitchen cupboard, we keep a bottle of it like this. And this lives in our kitchen cupboard 24/7. It's been, a bottle like this has been in our cupboard since 1975, coming up 50 years. Now, in the kitchen, it's glass with a plastic lid because Dextrate, the guy who wrote the original book, he says to avoid plastic. So in our kitchen, we use glass, a plastic lid, because a metal lid will rust. And Shireen sells plastic lids here in the store. You probably all got wide mouth jars, but Shireen has wide mouth lids, plastic. And now, in my pickup truck and in my car, I don't want a glass bottle rolling around for breakage. So in my pickup and my car, we keep a plastic bottle with the clay, and it'll roll around through the heat of summer, through the freezing of winter, 365 days a year. But if we're camping, if we're traveling, and somebody gets hurt, burned, cut, bruised, bitten, we have clay in the trunk of the car and under the seat of the truck. Now, to make it, there's an easy way to make clay. How many in here have used clay externally before? Okay, not many. Oh, I love it. This is so fun to teach new people. So to mix the clay from a dry powder to a gel, the recipe is 3 parts water to 1 part clay. If there's a hard way and an easy way, the easy way is to put some of the water in the jar first. So that's 2 cups of water in there. To 2 cups of water, I add 1 cup of clay. Now, the clay is going to sit on the water. If I put the clay in first, I would never get water to the bottom of the jar. If I put all the water in first, and then the clay, I'd never get water to the top. So it's clay, water, clay. Water, clay, water. And then here's that 3rd cup. So I've got my 3-to-1, and the clay's in the middle. And you can see that dry clay is white, wet clay is gray. And we could come back to this afternoon, I'm going to teach this class again. We could come back this afternoon and this white layer would still be there if I didn't do this. And so once you've got water, clay water, then you shake it up. And you can hear how runny it is. And so at the end of this class, in an hour, we're going to take this lid off and we're going to hold it over this guy's lap. What do you think?
It'll thicken up, I hope.
You hope. It will thicken up. But knowing that it takes 2 to 3 hours for it to fully swell, that's why I brought this one, so that we can use it right now. Now, the reason that you want clay on hand, made up in advance, is best told in the story of our secretary's little 4-year-old daughter. One night put her hand on a stove right after it had been turned off. Her little hand stuck to the hot plate. her mother grabbed her, stuck it under the faucet to run water on it, which you should do to get the heat out, and then she just buried her hand in this mud, and then sat down in a rocking chair with this little 4-year-old girl who's just screaming her lungs out. Her little girl was asleep in her arms within 15 minutes.
Wow.
Not just had quit crying, was asleep. Mother got up, took a bread sack, and slipped a bread sack over the hand and up the arm. Because on a burn, you don't want the clay to dry. And if you write anything down, write that down. In this book, there's one at the end. There's a new edition of the book, and there's a mistakes you can make is in the back of the book. And one of the mistakes you can make with clay is letting it dry on a burn. So bread sack over the hand, went in later in her bed. That little girl slept through the night. In spite of the fact that her mother went to the stove, scraped her flesh off from the stove, and threw it in the garbage can. This little girl comes to her mother the next morning, not in tears or in pain, just asking, can we take this bag off my hand? Her mother said, no, you have to leave that on there today. After breakfast, she saw her riding her little bike with both hands on the handlebars. That night, 24 hours after the accident, the mother said, I couldn't stand it. I had to see that hand. She took her in the bathroom, took the bag off, washed the hand, never did another thing to it. And I saw that hand 2 days later when her daycare fell through. She came to where I was working with this little 4-year-old, and I had heard the story. I said, let me see this hand. Sticks her little hand out. No blisters, no lines, nothing except on the heel of the hand where the flesh had come off, there was a line of pink skin. No scab, no scar, just pink skin. So we're going to show you how to treat a burn, because the mistake that most people make a mistake, and that is they don't use enough. Now, I need somebody, a volunteer, to come up, and we're going to treat a burn. And I have a little.
You're going to burn us?
Yes, and I have a torch, one of those little.
Just kidding.
I am too. Can we use your arm?
Sure.
Okay, I need a bare arm. We're going to pretend he's got a burn. And the burn is no bigger than the end of that bottle. And if he had a burn just that size on his arm, we would use that much clay. It's not a cream or a lotion. You want, and you don't rub it in. No. You want that much clay, and you want it on there, and then you want to cover the burn, the area, and 1 inch on all sides. So if you got a burn this big, you cover it and you want it about a 1/2 inch thick.
I've got a question. What do you buy this clay stuff here? Or where?
Okay.
I know what.
Do you need to leave?
Oh, yeah. So.
Shireen sells it.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, but get one of the books, because that'll help. Okay, so but you can see it's thin enough. I'm not having to press it, push it. How does that clay feel?
It's cold.
Now, is this room cold? Room temperature clay feels cold. And what's better on a burn than something cold? And then once it's on there, and again, now if this were a real burn, we would have ran water on it, to get the heat out. And we covered the burn 1 inch on all sides, good 1/2 inch thick, and then you cover it. Now, can you handle plastic on your skin? Okay. Some people, if they can't handle plastic on their skin, you can do this same thing with a wet towel. But if they can handle plastic, that's just better, because then you don't have to keep getting the towel wet. And so then you cover it with plastic, because you don't want it to dry. And that's how you can do it. Now, you can expect the pain of a burn to drop 80% within the first 15 or 20 minutes and stay dropped as long as 2 conditions are present. One is that the heat is out of the burn, and the other is you've got enough clay on there. So once you put it on there like that, you just monitor the pain. If it starts to hurt, then ask yourself the question, is there still heat in this? Do we have enough clay on there? The answer to either question is take that clay off, either run more water on it,
Cold water.
Cool water, or if heat's not the issue, then just put more clay, new clay, and it'll feel cool again, and the pain will drop down again, and it'll stay down as long as those 2 conditions are present. Now, so you change it if the pain comes up in 1 hour. You change. If it's 2 hours, if it's 5 hours, you change. It may not come up at all, but you still want to change it twice a day, because the clay acts as a sponge, sucking out the toxins, the infection, the byproducts of the healing process, sucks that out. And so just like your dishcloth on your kitchen counter, you know, if you don't change the dishcloth often enough, they get really rank. Clay can get really rank if you don't change it often enough. So if clay is stinky, that doesn't mean, oh, we got to quit using clay. No. It's like saying, well, boy, this dishcloth is really stinky. I better quit washing off my countertops. You change it. And you change it twice a day until it's pink skin. For this little girl with a hand, it was 24 hours. With my friend with the acetylene torch across his arm, it was 3 days. And a friend who was in the burn center, I could tell you a burn center story that would knock your socks off. For him, it was a month. So hold the question, write it down, write your questions down on that piece of paper, and I promise we'll answer them. We can actually go into the lunch hour. That's why Shireen put me at this time, because she knew, this is so frustrating. I try to share 45 years of clay information in 45 minutes. That's a joke. Anyway, if this were that's how you treat a burn. Now, if this were a curling iron burn on your head, maybe some of you have, you don't have to shrink wrap your whole head. You just take a piece of plastic, put the clay on there, like this, and then just take a piece of saran wrap and just put over it. And the saran wrap will stick on there, and it'll hold, and it'll slow the drying down just fine. Eventually, it's going to, dry because your head's not shrink wrapped. But when it starts to hurt, you just wash that off, put on new clay and another, piece of plastic big enough to cover. So curling iron burns, steam burns. There's not a burn. The clay. Write the question down. I don't want to be rude, but we can cover a lot more if I stay with my presentation, I promise we'll answer every question. So if this were an infection, we would do the same amount of clay, but we would not use plastic. Because on an infection, you want it to dry some. You want it to dry from mayonnaise consistency to Play-Doh consistency. Because as it dries, that's when it really sucks and draws. That's when it really pulls. So you cover it with fabric. And by covering it with fabric, it will dry depending on how much clay you got, depending on how many layers of fabric. It may dry in 6, 8, 10, 12 hours, but sometime before it's totally dry, then you wash it off. And if you take it off when it's like Play-Doh, it's fun to see what's on the underside of that clay, because you may see it may be green, yellow, pussy. It may stink, especially if it's the first time you've used it, it will stink. The lady with the tiller tying in her leg, the first 2 days of clay, it stunk because it had had 3 days in the hospital to build up that infection. But he said after those 2 days, never again did it smell. So you change that every day. It's fun to see what clay sucks out. I have a friend who's had a big wooden sliver under his fingernail, and they tried to get it out with tweezers and couldn't get a hold of it. So they got a needle and began digging under this guy's fingernail with a needle, trying to hook the sliver to pull it up to get tweezers on it. And finally this 20-year-old kid said, hey, bag this. He said, I can live with that sliver, but I can't live with you and that needle. His grandma put a big glob of clay, about like a small hen's egg, over his finger, wrapped it with a handkerchief. His pain level, he said, dropped from a 10 to a 2 within 15 minutes. Went to bed with that handkerchief on his hand. The next morning, takes the handkerchief off. The clay comes off, stuck to the handkerchief, and in the clay was the sliver. I have a friend who, his mother fell in a parking lot, buggered up her knee. Went to the doctor, had it cleaned, taken care of, but 2 weeks later, it's still oozing and festering. He said to his mom, let's see what clay will do. They put a big glob of clay on her knee, wrapped it with a dish towel, tied a knot, hold it. She went to bed, slept through the night. The next day, she unties the knot, takes the dish towel off. The clay is stuck to the towel. In the clay was a piece of glass that had been in her knee for 3 weeks. We've seen the clay pull out rubber, glass, rocks, wood, plastic. We have seen, it can pull out anything. But let's go on, because there's so much to tell. But that's how you do an infection, a wound. My dad had an infection in his hand with a red line all the way into the armpit, the color of your collar. And they packed his hand in clay, wrapped it with a handkerchief. He went to bed with a red line up his arm. He got up the next morning with no red line. I have a cousin who had an infection in his leg from a chainsaw cut, had a red line into the groin, packed it in clay, wrapped it with a towel, went to bed with a red line up his leg, got up the next morning with no red line. It's amazing what we've seen the clay pull out. So you've seen a burn, you've seen infections. One disadvantage of the clay is it's messy. And so one thing, I'll tell you this story first because this is dear to my heart. My wife is a seamstress, and one night sewing costumes for the local middle school, she was flipping pom-poms out of the way, flipped a pom-pom just right to be wrong, and the needle came down on her finger. I heard her yelp. I was in the kitchen, she was in the sewing room. I went in the sewing room, and she had her finger in her mouth so she wouldn't bleed on this white fabric. There on the sewing table, I could see the pieces of the needle. So the needle had broken when it hit the bone as she jerked her finger back. She brought her finger out of her mouth. A big red jagged line appeared on her finger. She said, "Get me some clay." She stuck it back in her mouth. I went to our kitchen cupboard where our bottle of clay lives, which is where your bottles of clay are going to live after today, right? And I got a big glob of clay. I put it in the corner of a Ziploc sandwich bag, went into the sewing room, and she went right from her mouth into the clay and nestled her finger. We nestled her finger right in the clay, put a loose twisty tie above the knuckle, and she went back to sewing because these are costumes that had to be ready for the morning dress rehearsal. About 20 minutes later, I was in the kitchen making a phone call, and she came in to get a drink of water. As she's filling her glass, I said, "Honey, how's your finger?" And just as nonchalant as can be, she said, "It doesn't hurt." And I thought, you liar. I donate blood several times a year. That pricked finger will sting for an hour. Her finger was ripped open. To say it doesn't hurt in 20 minutes? No way. I said, "Honey, do you mean it doesn't hurt, or do you mean it's not excruciating?" She held up her finger and said, "Neal, there's no pain coming from that finger." She finished the costumes, went to bed, slept through the night, pain-free, kept her finger covered for a couple of days, and that was fine. That's you women's story. I'll tell you, this is your own personal story. I was helping the neighbor across the street with a broken sewer pipe, and I learned that day that broken PVC can sharp as a ceramic knife. And I learned that when one of my fingers got a big slab of skin, and it didn't remove it, it just sliced it and laid it open. Well, I'm a Boy Scout. I know how to stop bleeding. I just took that big flap of skin, put it back in place, and with direct pressure, I had the bleeding stopped within minutes. But then I thought of the raw sewage that had come out of that pipe, and I thought maybe I should do more than just stop the bleeding. I went across the street to my house, buried my finger in clay, plastic bag, just like with my wife, and by the time I walked back across the street to help, there was no pain in my finger. And I kept it buried in clay for several days. Now, hindsight, why didn't I use fabric? I could have. But the clay just really kept it together. My wife had to use plastic to not get clay on the fabric. But so, it's really more of an art than a science. Yeah, I could have used fabric. I used plastic. Did it work? Sure did. So anyway, that's another thing. Oh, I told you clay is messy. You could have done this on yourself, right? Can you imagine packing cracked ribs with clay? No. Can you imagine packing a pulled muscle in clay? The mess it would be? Well, here's how to minimize the mess. You use a piece of cheesecloth or gauze on a dinner plate, and you have put the clay on there, and depending on whether this is going on a 2-year-old or a 200-pounder lineman, you spread the clay out into what we call a burrito, just a patty of clay, folded excess cheesecloth over. If you've done this on a plate, you can turn the plate over, and now you've got a patty of clay that you can ace bandage onto cracked ribs, a pulled muscle, an earache. I've got earache stories, a black eye. Anywhere you want, you can ace bandage this on the body wherever it needs to be, and then it will be there, and when it's time to take it off, it'll come off as a nice, neat little patty. We have a son who we learned that 16-year-old boys don't tell mom and dad about hernias until they're so bad they can't get them back in. And now our son came to us as a junior in high school with this hernia that he was having trouble getting back in. He was scared, and rightfully so. We took him to a doctor who's specialized in laparoscopic hernia repairs. He said, this is bad. He checked our son out. He said, this is bad. If he were my son, we would operate in the morning. But he said, I know your son's a wrestler. These kids think their sports are important. So get him a hernia belt that he can wear and see if he can get by until the end of wrestling season, and then we'll fix it. But this is a bad one. Well, we got him a hernia belt that he wore every day. We made him a burrito that he wore every night. He would just make that burrito, stick it down inside his shorts over that spot, and the next day, when he'd get out of bed, he would just reach in and bring it out. And it would come out just like this, drier. It would go in like mayonnaise mustard. It'd come out like Play-Doh. And then he would just undo the cheesecloth, drop the patty of clay into the garbage can, wash the cheesecloth, and then use it the next day. He wore a hernia belt every day from mid-December till mid-February, when the wrestling season was over. He wore a clay burrito every night. By the end of the wrestling season, it hadn't hurt again, and it hadn't popped out, and it wasn't painful. So we didn't take him back to that doctor at the end of that wrestling season, or at the end of the next year's wrestling season, or the next. That kid's in his 40s now, has never had that hernia fixed that was supposed to have been fixed the next day. The burrito, the cheesecloth doesn't make the clay work any better. It just keeps it together better, because if we hadn't used the cheesecloth, by morning he would have had clay from kneecap to armpit. Externally, you can do a clay bath, or the clay has a negative electronic charge. It pulls out heavy metals, toxins, and poisons. So you can detoxify either by drinking the clay, that's the next part of the class, or by soaking your feet, or a full body bath. Just to long story short, a lady in St. George who had heavy metals soaked her feet. Within 3 days, she felt 10 years younger, pain-free, sleeping through the night, took care of a lot of her problems, but she didn't realize that the toxins, heavy metals that pulled out of her were in the water. She used the water to water her house plants, killed every plant in her house. A guy in Hawaii killed a section of his lawn from the water after soaking his feet. The clay pulls out toxins and heavy metals. Diaper rash, oh my goodness. The clay, dry powder clay, is a fantastic baby powder that keeps diaper rash from ever getting bad. But if diaper rash gets bad, then you go to the gel, and you can put that on that open wound, ugly diaper rash, and it's cool, it's soothing. Within 2 diaper changes, it's 90% better, and within 2 days, it's back to normal. A fun story with that, there was a lady who was doing that, and one day as she was changing her little boy's diaper, her sister-in-law was there and said, are you sure that's safe? Putting this gray mud on this little boy's private areas. And this mother, looked at her friend, her sister-in-law, and said, safe? You're worried about safe? I dare you to try that with butt paste. So let's talk about internal. Dextrate, the guy who wrote the book, says that to take the clay internally, it's a teaspoon in a glass of water. The amount of water is not an issue. I like to use usually 8 to 10 ounces. There's an easy way and a hard way. The hard way that we didn't learn, that we did for 40 years, the hard way is to put a teaspoon of clay in the glass of water and try to stir it. It's like stirring flour and water. It sticks to the spoon, sticks to the glass, it's lumpy, but we did it for 30 years and we would choke it down. There's a better way. The better way is you take that teaspoon of clay and you sprinkle it on the water and let it sink down through the water by itself undisturbed and hydrate on the bottom of the glass. I sprinkled a teaspoon of clay on this glass this morning at 9 o'clock. Now I'm going to stir it, and it stirs as smooth as a glass of milk with no lumps, and you can you can't even detect any sediment if you do it that way. Now at my house, what I like to do is I have a glass kombucha bottle, that water and a teaspoon of clay. There was a teaspoon of clay in the bottom. Now, when you first put it, when you first put that clay, when you first sprinkle the clay on the water, it'll sink down through the water, and you can see it's kind of lumpy, kind of little mounds and lumps, depending on how it sank down through the water. Then, at some point, you shake it once, and when you shake it, then it will be just as fine as that glass that I drank. After a few hours, the sediment drops to the bottom, and now, instead of the sediment being in those soft lumps, you can see that's 1 teaspoon of clay. It swells. And so, at this point, this morning when I came, I shook this. So this morning, when I shook this bottle looked like that bottle. But now sitting here 2 hours, you can see most of the water is clear. You could drink the clear water off the top and throw the sediment away and get the same benefit as drinking the whole murky mess. The minerals dissolve into the water, the clay takes on the electronic charge, and so you don't need the sediment in the bottom. You can drink the clear water and get the same benefits. Now, some people like to stir it up and drink the whole murky mess. Other people, especially finicky husbands, teenagers, they like the clear. And if it's a small child who says, I don't want to drink that, it's got mud in the bottom, well, you just pour this clear water off the top into another container, and you can give it to a finicky husband or a fussy teenager, and they'll get the benefit, but they'll never know there was mud on the bottom of that glass. Now, this, if you don't want to mix it up every day, you can do it a gallon at a time. This is a gallon that I sprinkled 1/4 of a cup on this morning, and so stirring this, you'll see how much clay is stuck to the whisk when I bring it out. And the answer is none. Now, we could drink it right now, or we can let it set. If we drink it, if we stir it up every time we pour a glass off, by the time the water's gone, this clay will be gone. But if you don't want to drink the murky stuff, after you've stirred it that one time, you can never stir it again. Just pour off a clear glass each time you feel the need. At some point doing that, you're going to get some pretty heavy sediment. At that point, when you're starting to get more sediment than what you like, then you throw that out, fill it up with a new pitcher, a gallon of water, and your 1/4 cup. I could tell you stories, knock your socks off. But it's 12 o'clock and it's lunch, so you've got the one handout. There's another handout here that I'll give. I don't pass this out beforehand because I don't want you looking at these notes while I'm talking. But this is a summary, a 2-page summary of the notes from the class. I would still recommend the clay book because it goes into so much more than this. And then this is just a 1-page mistakes you can make. And this mistakes is also in the book. So I'll put it there. I'm not going for lunch. Any questions?
So once you pour out the clear water, is there anything that you can use to place the sediment at the bottom?
Yeah. So the question is, if you only drink the clear water off the top like this, is there anything you can do with the sediment? Yes, you can use it for your flowers. You could put it in your compost. There might be some minerals in there that be good for your plants. You would not want to add more water, again, because the minerals that were there in the first won't be there in the next batch. But I would put on your flowers.
And then how thick, when you put it on a room, would you say
Half inch. Yeah, go half inch, a good half inch. Even 3/4 is better because when you go to wrap it, sometimes you're going to squish that. So if you go for a half inch, in fact, well, stick your arm up here. This is another problem. The reason you want a good, half inch is because sometimes when you wrap it, once the clay's on there, you can't see the burn. And you may get it on there and you think, hey, wait a minute, that burn was more up here on the top. Well, if you've got enough clay there, you can work the clay up to where you need it Whereas if you started out with 1/4 of an inch, you can't do that.
The other thing is we found that if you use that press and stick.
Press and seal?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That to go around first, that works out well too.
Yeah.
We love the clay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's more of an art than a science. Be creative. Yes.
Back on the burns, when you change it and there's no smell, do you have to change it if there's no smell?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. Yeah. There's the clay does things besides just preventing the smell. So.
So does Redmond's mine this clay?
Yeah. Okay. So I don't represent any company. I don't work for any company. I'm retired. Shireen sells a clay here at the store. She sells a 10-ounce jar for $15, a 20-ounce jar for $21, and then a 6-pound bag for like $62. She doesn't have much on hand. The shipment that she ordered didn't get in here in time. But she sells she sells a clay here.
Is it mined in Utah?
It is.
So,
Uh-huh.
in Redmond, Utah?
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Right. This clay comes from Redmond, Utah. Again, I don't represent them. If I say what clay does and if I tie it to a specific company's product, that's making drug claims. So I teach natural clay.
Can you tell us some of the benefits from drinking it?
The first time, it was a lady, member of the family, who she was so constipated due to the iron and prenatal vitamins, she was having one bowel movement every week or 10 days. 3 days of drinking clay water, her bowels were normal. Our grandma's neighbor had diarrhea so bad it would be down both legs and in her shoes before she could even get out of the post office or this church to go home. She had become homebound. And 1 week of clay, she was in our office. She hugged me like I was her grandson and thanked me for this product. And I said, "Don't thank me. I didn't create this. This is God's creation. We were just blessed to learn about it." And with tears in her eyes, she said, "You don't know how good it is to go out in public again without fear of embarrassment." So diarrhea, constipation, my uncle he said it did more for his ulcers than anything else had ever done. My high school wrestling coach says it cured his hiatal hernia. That list that you have there, yeah. Arthritis is on both sides, because some people will pack an arthritic joint in the clay like this, and some will cover it with plastic, some cover it with fabric, and they both say it helps. Other people say drinking the clay helps arthritis.
How much a day would you drink?
That depends. 1 teaspoon a day is the normal. If you're just going to take it as a preventative, as a whatever, mineral supplement, a teaspoon a day. If I had a serious issue, I would take it twice a day. Some people take it in the morning, some take it at night, some take it with food, some take it on an empty stomach, some take it on an as-needed basis, some take it, there's all kinds.
For a 5-year-old with constipation, how much would you do?
5-year-old with constipation, I'd mix up a glass, which a teaspoon, 8 or 10 ounces with a teaspoon, and a 5-year-old, I'd probably give them half of that.
Is this flavorful, this part?
You tell me. I'm hoping that Shireen put on the memo that attendance at my class requires you to drink clay. That memo, that was on there, wasn't it? It wasn't?
But I'll drink.
So I'm not going to take this home. So this is available to come up and have a glass. Other questions?
Is there any way to test, to see if it's more effective or stronger with the water or with the substrate? Exactly the same.
Try. Well, people are different. Maybe for some issues. Maybe for some issues, the dry clay. The sediment would be important. But we have never seen a situation where we can tell a difference between drinking the clear versus drinking the whole muddy mess.
doesn't taste muddy.
Does it help with insects, kind of like the diatomaceous earth or anything like that outside in the garden?
No. In the garden, I would use diatomaceous earth.
Okay.
There are people who say that this gets rid of parasites.
That's what I've taken it for. Not that I had any, but.
Yeah,
So
question?
if you're taking it for celiac, would you recommend, I guess, twice a day rather than once?
No.
You think would do it?
Once a day. The people who I know who have used it to cure their celiac disease have just done it once a day.
Okay.
In fact, let me tell you a story. 6 months ago, in March, I'll put this back here and then people can pour their own. 6 months ago, I taught in this class, last March, I taught this clay class. There was a lady in the class who sent me a text the 1st of September with her story. She said, I've been drinking the clay pretty faithfully every day since March. She said, I'm one of these people who can't handle gluten. She said, if I even eat a quarter of a Costco muffin, I swell up like a blowfish. My belly pokes out like I'm 9 months pregnant, and I hurt like I'm 9 months pregnant. So for 15 years, I have had to avoid gluten. She said, I knew that my body was changing. I knew that things were different, reacting on food. But she said, I didn't realize how different things were until the last week of August, our family went camping, and without thinking about it, I ate a Costco muffin. And it was so good, and for lunch, I ate another one. And in the middle of the afternoon, it hit me, my belly's still flat. So she said, the next day, I ate more Costco muffins. 15 years of not being able to eat even a quarter without being in pain and drinking it, she said, pretty faithfully.
Every day for
Every
how
day,
long?
6 months. But she could tell her body was changing, during that. So could she have tried it at 5 months, 4 months? Don't know. It just happened to be that, about 6 months, March to September, August, that she ate them. Yes.
So we had a neighbor that was going to be having a bowel resection because his bowel was so in trouble. And after drinking the clay and the follow-up colonoscopy, the doctor said, if I were you, I wouldn't have it done.
I have a friend who was going to have his colon removed. He said, I'd rather have a bag on my side than this life I'm living. He had to drive 10 miles a day from his home to his office. He said, I would use sagebrushes along the highway as restrooms. And he said, so take it out, doc. I'd rather have a bag. So they did a colonoscopy to determine exactly where to cut. Thankfully, the doctor in the planning the surgery said, once I take it out, I can't put it back. Maybe we ought to up the level of steroids one more time. They did. 2 months later, all the negative side effects had gotten worse. No benefits had shown up. That's when I heard of his situation. I wanted to cry. I had no idea that a friend of mine was using sagebrushes along the highway as restrooms. So I said, Bart, I can't promise you a thing. There's no guarantees with this. But there's some people who say this clay helps ulcerative colitis. And he said, hey, yeah, his was ulcerative colitis. 2 months later, he was symptom-free. Now, he drank almost a quart a day. He mixed up the gallon and would drink almost a quart a day of it. But 2 months later, he was symptom-free. He quit taking all 30 pills a day. He went 4 more months symptom-free. And then the doctor's office called and said, it's time for your colonoscopy, your annual colonoscopy, as a follow-up of last year's visit. If it had been me, I would have said, no thanks. You've been there. You've done that. I don't need you. He wanted to know if he was really as good as he felt. He kept the appointment. The doctor came to his father-in-law, who was in the waiting room, waiting to drive him home, and asked the father-in-law, what medicine is Bart on? And what's his diet? And the father-in-law didn't dare say, well, he stirs this dirt and water and drinks this muddy. So the father-in-law just played dumb, said, I don't know. I don't know what he eats. I don't know his medicine. You'll have to ask him. And the doctor said, tell him his colon hasn't looked this good for 10 years. It's as if he's never had the disease, having come back in 3 years for a routine checkup. So you've heard some stories today. I have 3 pages, single-spaced, stories I would like to tell you. I can't. But experiment with it. Try it. The worst thing that can happen with clay is nothing. In 48 years of using it, we've never seen an allergic reaction. We've never seen a negative side effect. We've never seen it make anything worse. Now, sometimes, occasionally, you'll have what they call a healing crisis, a Herxheimer. It's a healing crisis where things will get worse before they get better. It's a cleanse. We have seen a few of those, not many. It's crazy the things you can do. A guy told me one time that he makes a clay burrito out of using plastic instead of cheesecloth. I said, "You're nuts. That can't work." He said, "Yes, it does." I said, "What? The clay works through that plastic?" And he said, "Yes, just like cheesecloth. And it keeps all the mess in." I said, "That's impossible." He said, "Neal, that's the way we do it. And it works."
So like, what was he using it for that it worked?
Every external wound that you can imagine,
The hernia.
the hernia, the burns, everything. It blows my mind. I haven't tried it yet. I made a bag of plastic. I am just so, my mind can't be wrapped around the fact that clay could work through plastic.
It's new meaning to the touch of the master's hands with the potter's wheel. We're more malleable with clay than there's something to it.
Maybe there is. Again, I wish I could tell you more about clay. If you have any other questions?
Anything related to hormones or like teenagers, skin, you know? Acne.
Oh, fantastic. The clay, I mean, you smear this clay on your face like cake icing, and then let it, when it goes on, it'll be dry. I mean, it'll be gray, and when it turns white, when it dries, then it's white. We'll smear it on a teenager's face or a woman's face. It's all gray. When it starts to turn white in some of the areas, maybe when it's like 1/3 white and still 2/3 gray, wash it off. Do that every night. I had a boy in my life years ago. He had what they call a pizza face, just terrible acne. And he was the son of my friend, and I thought, well, how do you go to somebody who's already probably so self-conscious because the kids, kids were making fun of him. He was the brunt of the jokes. And how do you go to somebody like that and point out his problem? And so I struggled, and finally, I think as an answer to prayer, I went to him and I said, "Josh, I have a problem I need some help with. Would you help me?" And he said, "Sure, Brother Bosshardt. What do you need?" I said, "I need somebody with some pimples to put this clay on their face to see if it'll help. Would you do that for me?" He said, "Sure." 6 weeks.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? In 15 minutes, folks, we're having our raffle in the front. If you'd like to sign up, it's that table right inside the doors, just 1 ticket per person, and we'll be announcing whoever gets it at 12:30. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you so much.
So anyway, 6 weeks later, he had a cover girl complexion. Now, one word of warning for the women and teenagers, if you put it on and let it get too dry, it will pull so hard, it'll break the capillaries in your skin and leave your face a bright red color for a couple of hours. So if it leaves your face red, don't leave it on so long next time. And if you start out with like 1/3 white and 2/3 still gray, it probably won't be a problem.
What about for that? Do you think it would help with scarring damage from acne? And also, what are the effects on oily? Would it pull, kind of like similarly to oil pulling? Would it?
Oh, oil pulling. They say. Well, the clay has 70 minerals, so it's going to remineralize your body. The clay is very alkaline, so it's going to help your body be more alkaline. What was the other thing? Scarring. I have no stories of it helping old scars.
Wrinkles.
No stories. Ugliness, no stories, or I wouldn't look like this. No. Cellulitis, yes, but not cellulite. Weight loss, no stories.
Nerve damage.
If there's healing to be done, it could. I'd try it. The worst thing that can happen is nothing.
Broken bones?
Broken bones, yes. My wife twisted an ankle. The hospital said it was just a sprain. She packed it in clay for a week and could get along fine as long as the clay was on there. 5 years later, she twisted that same ankle, thought it was broken because it hurt so bad, went to the hospital. They said, nope, just a bad sprain. She packed it in clay 3 days later, and she got around fine with the clay packed on there for 3 days. 3 days later, the hospital called and said, hey, the technician was reading that x-ray. You did break your ankle last week. You broke it right next to where you broke it before.
Oh. But what did the clay help?
Don't know. Maybe it would have healed just fine without clay. The thing the clay did is it got her out of pain. Other questions? What's that?
Doug's arm.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about how that healed his arm.
So he scraped his arm and it just ripped all the skin right off. And he healed with clay. That's the only use.
Plus, I had a precancerous lesion underneath my eye, and used it on there too, so.
You didn't see the picture of the head on top, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, you've seen that? Okay. Other questions?
The book, it's your book,
It's my book.
and it's here.
They sell it at the front
Yes,
counter.
okay.
Well, yeah, they're on it. It's in their book area,
Okay,
but you pay for it at the front counter.
all right.
So I'll be here again this afternoon at 3 something for salt and then 4 for clay. We'll go through the same thing if you have people who want to come for that.
Do you have a pamphlet for the salt when I missed it?
A handout.